I'm really looking forward to our guest today.
That would be Kelvin Hair. Kelvin is an artist in his own right, son of the legendary Florida Highwayman painter Alfred Hair. And our topic today is the Florida Highwaymen, a group of 26 men and one woman, African-American painters during the Jim Crow era. Their heyday was the late 50s, 60s for sure, into the mid-80s. So much of that ideal of Florida beauty, the bright sunsets and the turquoise water and the swaying palm trees, the ocean. Of course, that was the reality and still is in some places, but that's what the Highwaymen painted. That's what they captured, this natural Florida of people's dreams. And during that post-war era into the 70s and 80s, when so many new residents and tourists were coming into the state, they would buy these paintings and take them with them, put them in their homes, and this is the natural Florida that they remember. Now, the Highwaymen worked in and around Fort Pierce beginning, like I said, in the 1950s. They were self-taught artists who depicted the state's scenic coastline and wild backcountry in dazzling combinations and colors and tones, brilliant tropical sunsets, wind-blown palms, towering sunlit clouds, and the blooming royal poinciana tree. Kelvin, when most people, myself included, think about the Highwaymen or see one of their pictures, it's the color that first stands out. I describe it as they seem to be coloring with citrus fruit and these tangerine sunsets and the orange and the watermelon skies. How did they achieve such extraordinary color that I frankly don't see anywhere else in the art world?
I think that can be attributed to the fact that when you take most artists that were trained technically, they have a certain pattern that they go by and a strict rule that they must adhere to. Mm-hmm. But because most of these artists was not very well educated, some of them, did complete school, but a lot of them didn't complete school. Some of them did, some of them didn't. And because in the Jim Crow South, 50s and 60s, being a Black man, you weren't going to get much money for your art. You weren't going to be allowed in the art gallery. So they had to paint faster. Mm-hmm. And what it did was it stripped the painting from the rules that confine most artists. Yeah. So what you walked away with was like just raw emotion. I can almost attribute it to something like when you dance and there's a format to a dance, and then you just get a soul song up there and you just start moving. And the paintings were, they were stripped from this must have to be this way. This is a complementary color to this. So this has to go there. That has to be like this. And because they didn't have any formal lessons, it was just raw emotion. And that's what you got out of it.
The color combinations are wild. The hues are spectacular. The colors are utterly saturated, creating this technicolor dream world of Florida that so many tourists and visitors to the state like myself identified and associated with the state in our imaginations. And you talked about how they had to paint fast. And I think another key distinction to know about the Highwaymen is that this was a career choice. The career choice was work in the citrus fields, backbreaking labor out in the sun, or find something else to do. As much as they were interested in art, as much as they were interested in their craft, this was how they put food on the table. And that speed was a result of having to produce material. They couldn't sit in a studio and turn out one painting a month and eat that way. Talk a little bit about the economic and social pressures on their productivity.
Well, I'm going to tell you this, that a lot of people tend to think that the Highwaymen were in their heyday rather poor. They started out poor, but they really didn't end up that way, because this is what you have to kind of put your mind into thinking. And back in the 60s, in the late 50s and 60s, when my dad was painting, he was getting anywhere from $25 for a small painting till, sometimes they get like 50, 75 bucks. Mm-hmm. And if you put yourself back in that time, they didn't have the technology then to make cheap, inexpensive prints like you can go get now. So you had to have original painting, which was $300 plus. If you had a doctor's office, if you had a motel, you just had bare walls and it was really drab looking. So here's this kid, he comes along with these paintings. And I say kid because my dad started painting and selling, 1920. He died at 29. Here's this kid comes along with these paintings and he sell them to you for $30 each. And you're like, give me all. And you put them in your hotel room or you put them in your doctor's office.
That's great.
But what you have to remember too is my dad sometimes would paint 50, 60 paintings in a day, but that wasn't always. Most of the time it'd be like maybe 20, 30. So if you look at he's selling 10, if he's selling 10 paintings at 300, that's 300 in a day. The average black person going out in the field was making like 30 a week. And, some of the salesmen tell me that there's times they brought my dad back, $800, $1,200. My dad really had a lot of money for his age back in those days. When black people really didn't have cars, he bought his cars cash. He bought all his salesman cars. I mean, the money was really rolling in pretty good, back in those days. Now, before the art, then yeah, most of them were pretty poor, but the artwork actually gave them the ability to feed their family. And that's why you see a lot of brothers in it. Like you see the Newtons, you see Harold, Lim, and Sam, you see the Newton brothers in it. You see the Buckner brothers in it. The reason why you see a lot of family members in it is if you're out making money, you're going to naturally tell your brother, or your family member.
Yeah.
So that's why you saw a lot of family members in it. But they actually were making pretty good money until the advent of cheap prints, copies came along, and they started coming out with different forms of art. And it kind of started to die out and wane away maybe in the 80s, late 80s or so. But before that, it really was a good time for them. They were making money and having fun.
And their overhead was pretty low too, wasn't it? Because I mean, they were using like masonite for their canvas.
Correct. Well, that was part of the plan because back in those days, my dad was taught how to paint by a kind of relatively famous artist named Backus. And he taught him how to paint a little bit slower, where you produce maybe 1-2 paintings a week. And my dad realized that he being a black man, wasn't getting the type of money that Bean would get, or a white artist. He wasn't getting to go to the art shows like they would. So what he did was he developed a faster way to paint, and he painted cheaply so he could still make a profit. Because back in those days, a canvas and a frame was pretty expensive. And that would not allow you to be able to sell a painting for $20. You'd lose money. So what he did was he started painting on a building material that they used in houses, almost used like drywall is today. It was a compressed cardboard, and it was called Upson board. And you get a 4x8 sheet for like maybe a little under $2. And then he used crown molding, which you see along the baseboards of your house or whatever. He used crown molding to make the frames.
Oh,
and so he had his canvas and his frame relatively inexpensive, so he could still sell a painting for $25 and make a profit.
Yeah, it's a wonderful story of how necessity is the mother of invention. And again, how excluded the highwaymen were. Again, this is the Jim Crow South. They were not getting museum exhibitions. They were not getting gallery attention. They were operating straight to market, essentially. And straight to market is where the name comes from. They sold this stuff out of the trunks of their cars. And I think that's just such a wonderful detail of the highwaymen. They were the highwaymen because they sold most of these paintings along, is it US 1 there in the Fort Pierce area generally, or the epicenter?
That is where they lived. So quite naturally, you find a lot of paintings here. But they sold pretty much all over Florida because the salesmen would take off in the cars and they wouldn't sell here. The salesmen normally took off. They'd be in Palm Beach. They'd be in Tampa. They'd be in Lake Wales, Clewiston. They just rode all around. And there was a big need for these paintings because there was no cheap prints or copies. Yeah. So they'd walk into a hotel or a doctor's office, and quite naturally, they wanted something to put on the wall so it wouldn't look so drab.
Right. Yeah, one question I was curious about, as they were driving through Florida in this era, did they get hassled by cops? Did they run into people saying, get out of here?
Sometimes they did. Sometimes they've run into like bad stories. I've heard the stories. Now, I wasn't around that time. When my dad passed, I was 5, but I have heard the stories, and they did get hassled a little, but they didn't get hassled extremely bad to the point to where they were getting physically harmed. They got verbally abused. I know Al Black told me he got arrested a couple times for solicitation.
Wow. Wow.
And they got verbally abused. Al said one time, I guess someone kicked a hole in his paintings, but they didn't actually get beat up. I think they kind of got more of a little bit of a pass from like really getting physical danger because they were artists, and people always kind of give artists a little bit of a pass of being eccentric. That's why I think Bean, back in the day when he taught my dad how to paint, and he would have these black kids over there, and he would have these like parties over there where they would be playing music and stuff like that, and it'd be whites and blacks. And the reason why I think Bean didn't get hassled so much is because, one, he had some fame, but he was an artist, and everybody looks at artists as being a little bit quirky anyway,
By some accounts, because of that incredible volume in this statewide sales network, there are some 200,000 Highwaymen paintings, not only around Florida, but obviously they've made their way around the South and the nation as well. You talked about how young your father died and how young you were when he died. What was your introduction into the group and your introduction into the art world? Because you now yourself are a successful Florida artist working out of that Fort Pierce area.
What got me started was I knew that my dad was an artist, but he wasn't famous when I was young. And I'm talking about when I was in high school and elementary school. But my dad was also in art class. For some reason, my dad had an affinity for shooting pool. My dad had, I found all this out later. He had an affinity for gambling. He would go to the dog track, things like that. And it's just funny how sometimes things are in your DNA. But when I was in elementary school and high school, I was a kid. I wasn't a slow kid, but I was a kid that was always in the corner drawing on the paper. So I was always drawing characters, sketching them, just constantly doing. That's just what I like to do. And quite naturally, I gravitated from that to then painting. I think it was just in me, just like it was in him.
Did the other members of the Highwaymen kind of bring you in and show you the ropes, or did you learn it on your own? Or
yes, some of them did. Like I can really give a lot of credit to Johnny Daniels. He's passed away now, but he's one of the original guys. He taught me a lot, and I got to give credit to Al Black. He taught me, like Al will tell you. Al will tell you in a minute. He'll say, I may not be the best artist in the world, but I'm the best salesman that was ever born. He taught me how to sell. He really did. I remember the first time, there was all the stories about going out on the road. Like I said, my dad died when I was 5, so I had never gone out on the road. Now I've been on the road several times, but the one story, I'm gonna try and make it quick. Al had gotten out of prison, and Al and my dad were friends, and he was like, Kelvin, I'm finna go on the road selling some pictures, and we're talking in the 2000s, somewhere in the early 2000s when he got out of prison. And he said, I'm going to go on the road selling pictures. You want to come? So quite naturally, I wanted to experience, because I had never been on the road. So I wanted to experience, but I'm thinking in my mind, because by this time, the artists have been inducted in the Artist Hall of Fame. It's not $25 anymore, like a 16 by 20. I'm selling a 16 by 20 at that time. Right now, I sell them for like $1,800. But at that time, I was selling them for $1,200. And I was like, we're not finna get $1,200 a painting out of the trunk of our car anywhere. But I wanted to go on the road. But I wanted to go on the road with him. So, and I'm just meeting him, really. He told me to meet him at his house. So I met him at his house, and I got probably 20 paintings with me. And so I started thinking, I was like, man, we're not going to sell nothing, and I'm not going to carry all these paintings with me. So I took 2 out of my car and brought them in with him, and he got in his car, and we jumped in the road, and we rode for about an hour and 15 minutes across the state. We stopped at this one spot. By this time, it must have been 9 o'clock. We stopped at this one spot. I sold both my paintings for $1,000, and I was going around with him watching him sell all his paintings the rest of the day. If I would have brought the rest of my paintings, we would have sold them. And in fact, here's another true story with Al. I had just broken up with a girlfriend that I had. This is after he made me a believer in his sales ability. I had just broken up with this girlfriend of mine, and I let her keep the car. I had the truck, and I let her keep the car. And I was like, Al, he's like, yeah. And he's like, man, I want to get me like a used Cadillac or something. I was like, let's go on the road today, see what we can do. We struck out the next morning on the road. I made $16,000 out the trunk of the car. I tell you, Al is the best salesman I've ever seen. And if he would have been afforded the luxuries that kids have today, I really think he would have been a genius. His memory is impeccable. I was driving one day. We're on the road again. Me and Al, we've gone on the road hundreds of times. I'm driving and we're over around like below Clewiston somewhere. And Al's like, take a right here, make a left here, turn here. And we're like off the main road. And then we come up on this privately owned a lumber company or something where they did all kind of hardware, like a hardware store. Okay, so we come up on this hardware store and Al like, come on, let's get out. And we went in there and the guy started talking and the guy remembered Al. Al went in there looking for his dad. His dad has passed, left the hardware store to the son. And the son like, I remember you. I was like 15, 16 when you used to come around here selling paintings to my dad and da-da-da-da-da. And the guy remembered Al. And now Al's telling him about how you're in the Hall of Fame, this and that. So now the guy's acting like, he doesn't have much money. He's not sure, da-da-da-da-da. But the more he started talking, the more he realized Al was for real and who he was. And so now he had gained trust in us. So he took us in the office. And this is a true story. He took us in the office. And Al and I sold him some pictures. I think I might have made like maybe $4 or $5 grand. Al made probably around the same, $4 or $5 grand. But the guy was faking like he had no money. But after he trusted us, he took us in the office. He reached into the safe and he had a stack of money. When he pulled the money out for us, it like did not even touch the stack. It's like the stack was still full, even though he, to pay us. Yeah, that's how much money he had in the safe.
Wow.
When Al saw that, I don't know what happened. Al took this guy off and started talking to this guy. And Al ended up selling him 3 more paintings for more than what he sold him the past 6 for. I'm like, how did you do that? I don't understand it. But the guy, if you listen to him, if you listen to Al, you will buy a painting. Period.
Yeah. What a great sales technique. What other sales techniques do you remember him plying with the customers out on the road?
I remember one he told me. Now, I wasn't actually present for this one, but this one he told me. It was him and a friend of his. They were out selling. He supposedly went to a guy's home, and I can't remember if he told me this or the guy that was in the car with him told me, but one of the two told me this. He went to a home because once they try and sell to businesses, if they were like hitting zero, they go to like affluent neighborhoods and go door to door. So he went to this house and this one guy told him like, get off my porch, da-da-da-da-da. And Al basically told him, hold on, mister. Said, you see my friend out there in the car? Said his dad just died and I'm trying to get money to get to the funeral. We got these paintings here we trying to sell, da-da-da-da. And the guy bought like 4 paintings from him to help him get to the funeral.
If you don't mind me asking, what did Al been in prison for?
He actually went into prison for embezzlement, I guess. And I really believe, and I know I've seen some of the case stuff and I've talked to him. Mm-hmm. He went to prison, in my viewpoint, if he would have not been on crack or had a lawyer, he would have never done 1 day in prison, because the way the story really went, he used to work for a rich couple and the guy who was his friend passed away. So now his wife or widow was there alone. Mm-hmm. And Al used to do work for them. Well, I think a couple years passed and him and the widow start seeing each other. Uh-oh. But she was wealthy. Mm-hmm. She was wealthy. Mm-hmm. Al was on crack and she would give him money. Uh-oh. And to the tune of maybe, I don't know, over the course of maybe 2 years, I think she gave Al around $1 million.
Oh my gosh.
And he had nothing to show for it because he was on crack. And the son, I guess, does the records and books, and they press charges on him. And she even got into court and said, I gave him that money with the assumption of maybe getting some of it back. Al didn't want to say that he was having an affair with a white woman. He didn't want to say that in court. And he was on crack, dropped out of school, I think in the 7th grade, and he's on crack. And the state comes and tells him, listen, you can sign this deal for like 10 years or you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison. So what do you do when somebody hits you with that? He just settled, and signed the deal.
No, he needed a lawyer, definitely.
You need a lawyer. And then also, you got to think he came from a time where, even though this was, I think, maybe in the 90s or 80s, but he came from a time where if you said you was having sex with a white woman, you might get killed, let alone just get life in prison. So he was afraid to even say, well, hey, we're having sex. She gave me the money,
I'm assuming he didn't get to do much painting while he was behind bars, right?
Oh, he did a lot.
Oh, did he? Oh, okay.
There's a book out on him called Concrete Dreams. He actually went to
Mhm.
all the prisons and painted murals on all the walls of all the prisons in the state of Florida. He probably did over 300 murals in the prisons. And there's a book on him about doing that. Because when he painted these murals on the prison, the prisoners liked it because it brightened up their day and the walls weren't so drab. You know what I mean? You had these scenes on the wall.
Yeah.
He even tells me today,
too.
Yeah, he even tells me today that he doesn't like the fact he went to prison, but he said it was one of the best things for him because he said he would have still been on crack.
Do you know if any of those murals still exist?
Yes, a lot of the murals still exist. In fact, I think one of the prisons was a female prison, I think that they demolished. And one of the museums came in and took some of the murals out before they demolished it. But a lot of the prisons still exist. Yeah. And you can actually see the mural paintings in that book. It's a book called Concrete Dreams by Gary Monroe. And you can see the murals and you can see how it's painted on concrete block walls.
Now, you mentioned about you mentioned about Al's phenomenal memory. It makes me wonder, when these guys were painting, when the Highwaymen were painting, were they painting from life, from what they saw, or were they painting things that they had seen and remembered from while they were driving around?
Most of the time it was memory. A few of them painted on scene, but most of the time they painted back at a studio from memory.
There were about 28 original Highwaymen and one woman. How many of them did you get a chance to meet? And what are your memories of some of the other members of the group?
I think there was like maybe 26 of them, the originals. I got a chance to meet most of them that were still living around the late 90s. But when I really got into it heavy, like Harold had passed away. I did meet Lim. I met Sam, but Harold had passed away. So I didn't actually meet him. I mean, I have fond memories of all of them. We all had a lot of fun. Isaac Knight, a great character. I mean, I have fond memories of him. Johnny Daniels. Me and Johnny Daniels, we probably painted together the most. We painted together like every day for 4 or 5 years, and like on the weekends we get the deep fryer out and we cook out and paint. I mean, we just had a ball. That's just what we did.
Now, when you say paint together, you guys you weren't working on the same canvas. We were
in the same garage. We were in like a big detached garage, and it was like a huge, like a 3-car detached garage. And we were just in there painting. It was probably 3 or 4 of us in there painting.
Does it work better to paint with somebody else there, or do you feel like you do better work on your own?
I can paint on my own sometimes, but sometimes painting with others motivates you because you may be in the mood to where you can reach a dry spell, like where you might not paint for a week or two. But if you're painting with people, you're going to paint every day. And then the way we would always say, check your feelings at the door. So when you came in there, it would make you get better fast because they will pick at you. I remember I did one palm tree and they picked at me, told me my palm tree, they called it, what did they call it? They called it some girl name because they looked like I had 2 ponytails come out. And they picked at me for the long. But I bet I never did another palm tree like that.
Were they doing the dozens on your painting? Is that what they're doing?
Yeah.
Your palm tree is so bad.
What do you think it would mean to that group to see how much recognition their artistry and what sort of legacy they have left behind? They got to see some of that come to fruition, certainly, but to the extent now that there's traveling shows and books and that they are firmly entrenched as a critical pillar, really, of Florida's cultural history.
My dad would probably be amazed at the price that some of his paintings have fetched. Paintings that he probably sold for $50-$60. I've seen them go for $30,000, $40,000, $20,000 as a common price. And I've talked about this with serious art collectors and serious dealers. All of that doesn't even touch the surface because here's the thing. Right now, you can still go to Al Black and buy a painting. You can still go to Roy McClendon and buy a painting. You can still go to some of the other artists that are still living and get an original Highwayman painting. What happens, and all of the Highwaymen are really up there in age, all right? Now, what happens when the last living Highwayman, the original, is gone? Now, for me to buy that painting, guess what? I got to come to you and buy it off your wall. Now, what are you going to charge me? It's going to cost an arm and a leg.
A lot.
You're going to see the price of these.
There may be another arm too.
They're going to really zoom up when you have to go and get it off somebody's wall.
Did you meet the one female highwayman?
Oh, yeah, Marion Carroll? Yeah, I knew her well.
What was she like?
Actually,
What's she like?
oh, she was very nice, religious. She was into the church. I had an art gallery at one time, and she had a little space, in the gallery. But very nice. Her kids were nice. Her kids would come to her to the shows and help her, set up all her equipment and things like that. I think she played a few musical instruments and would sing. If you caught her singing, it was a church song. You know what I mean? She wasn't singing like a blues song. She'd be singing a church song. Very, very nice. I have really, really fond memories of her.
How can people find your work, Al's work, the work, the contemporary work of the living original Highwaymen and yourself?
Most of the time, if you want like my work or Al's work, you would have to call us directly or catch us at a show. I did one time a while back have an internet page where you could buy off the internet, but nobody bought too much off the internet because they wanted to see the art.
Yeah.
And then secondly, there was a problem with the rotation. In other words, when I go to a show, everything I have is what I have. Like right now, me and Al have a show coming up together, and he's over there painting now because he didn't have any painting. So it's hard to leave paintings anywhere or put it up on a website, and you doing shows every week, and now it's gone. It's a good problem as an artist. Sure. It's a good problem as an artist.
It's like produce. You can't leave it around too long.
A lot of guys just they don't keep them very long, especially not Al. He's a great salesman too.
Yeah.
And a lot of times you go to the shows and the original guys, you go up there and you might sometimes catch them when they got like maybe 20 paintings, but a lot of times I've gone to shows and guys might have 4, 5, 6 paintings. That's all they got.
COVID really crushed that vibrant art festival sale circuit that so many artists rely on for making their living. How'd you do over the last year and the artists that having that circuit of festivals and shows shut down?
Everybody suffered because there was probably about at least 15 shows that got canceled for me. And I know talking to Al, similar for him, but being with Al, being connected to him, my sales suffered, yes, but not as much. Just like Al, his sales suffered, but not as much. Like he's over there trying to paint now because Al will make a phone call and be like, hey, I got some pictures. You want them? You know what I mean? And there's sometimes people be like, yeah, how many you got? I got like 12. Okay, bring them all to me. He'll sell them all.
Yeah.
He didn't sell them by the pound, right? He sold them
But that's the, what is it? If Muhammad can't go to the mountain will come to him or something. I'm sure he's got I picture him with a little, notepad with 1,000 phone numbers of people who've previously purchased pictures. And if they won't come to him, he'll go to them.
Plus, we do that all the time. Like I've sold pictures to Lance Walker, Peter Bush, and I think Lance did come to one show, but most of the time we go to them. Like Peter, he's never gone to a show that I've seen him. I would go to his office. Yeah. And when I'd sell like $20,000, $30,000 worth of paintings, but the mountain had to come to him,
When you paint, do you have a particular subject you like to come back to over and over again?
In me, I like to do different things, but the subject matter that I come back to the most is the one that I'm currently out of because it sells so well. And it's right here behind me. They're not finished, so don't pick at them. The Poinciana is the biggest seller. And what we say in the world of Highwaymen when we're there and it's just a group of us and we're talking amongst ourselves, if you don't have a Poinciana painting, you don't want any money.
Really? It's that popular? Wow. Is it just because of the vibrant colors or what do you think?
I think so. And because the Highwaymen have gotten known for painting the Poinciana. So I don't know if any collector or anyone that has really Highwaymen paintings, if they have at least 2 or more, I don't know if anybody that has 2 or more and none of them is a Poinciana. Almost everybody, their first one, they want a Poinciana.
Wow. Because when I think of the Highwaymen, I think of like sunsets, sunsets with palm trees or something like that in the background. But you're right. Now that I think about it, every one I've seen, there's a Poinciana there somewhere.
Yeah, the Poinciana is a big seller. Sunsets are good too, but the Poinciana is probably the biggest seller.
Not to go too deep into an art nerd hole, but did any of the Highwaymen or yourself ever fool around with figurative painting or portraiture or anything of that nature?
Yeah, I think Roy McClendon, I saw a couple of his portraits. He was the original guy. I saw some Maynards. In fact, I have in my house, I have a picture of a Black Jesus that John Maynard did. So some of them did portraits. I don't know who would have it. And if you do have it, it's probably worth $50,000 or $40,000. I don't know. My dad actually painted religious scenes. And when he met Backus, he took him painting of, I think, of Jesus, the first painting he showed Backus to critique. And I think the first painting he ever sold was to Mount Olive Baptist Church.
Oh.
And it was a picture of Jesus. And I think he said he sold it for $10
Wow.
back in the day. But I think he was still in high school at the time.
Now, what was their relationship?
Where these paintings are, I don't know.
What was their relationship between Beanie Backus and your dad? I mean, was it like mentor to mentee or friends?
I think it was mentor to mentee in the beginning. And then they got to be friends. And, like really, really close friends. Because I know when the first time I met Backus, it was in the 90s. And I remember he grabbed me, hugged me, started crying, said, "I love your dad very much." I went down to the Backus studio the very first time I met him.
What was that like?
Just hearing stories about my dad, takes me back. Everybody wants to hear, good stories about their dad.
Sure.
But just sitting around talking to Backus, I went back in his studio and talked to him. And, he's talking to him about my dad. He had a drink in his hand. I only met him like a few times before he passed away. But the times I did meet him, he was very welcoming and they were, enjoyable times.
What do you feel like is the ultimate legacy of the Highwaymen, of your dad and his colleagues?
One of the legacies and lessons you can learn from that, me being a Black man, is no matter what obstacles you face, find a way around it, because they were facing a lot of obstacles. Okay, you couldn't get in the art gallery. You can't get in a museum. You can't sell your painting for much. Found a way around all those. Okay, yeah. I can't sell it for much. I'll paint faster and sell it cheaper. Can't sell in an art gallery. I'll go sell door to door. So they just kept finding a way around the obstacles.
They persisted. Yeah.
Well said. Kelvin, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing these stories and letting us have some insight into this incredible world the Florida Highwaymen lived in.
All right.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was awesome.